First up is Lightyear, which is the latest feature film from Pixar Animation Studios, and I have been upfront about this before. I came from the world of animation, and so I tend to be a little more generous towards feature films that are animated, but I also, try to be as objective as I can. And I think when it comes to Pixar, we're all relatively generous towards those films because they have a track record of just amazing work, right? Like, it's, I would say, objectively amazing work. And so when a film like Lightyear comes out from that studio, there are certainly expectations on it. And it's hard because I'm just going to be upfront about the core of this review. I think if this had been not in a Toy Story franchise or not involving the Toy Story IP, and it had not necessarily come from Pixar, this would have been better received, or we wouldn't have had such high expectations for it. But because it does have all of those things in its DNA, I came in being like, I want this to be really good, but I don't think it's going to. Because Pixar, for me, they have told stories that have given us a vocabulary about how to talk about emotions, right? Like Inside Out gave us a way to be like, oh yeah, I'm operated by anger, or I'm operated by sadness right now, or core memories, or something like Coco, which just gave us a way to like cope with the afterlife and passing on and things like that. And or Up, which tells one of the greatest love stories of all time within, a few intro opening minutes, and then tells a great story afterwards. But like they have shown that they are able to innovate and be masters of their craft. And so when something comparatively mediocre comes along, it's kind of a bummer. I'll also say I was always more of a Woody person. I identified with his neuroses more than I identified with Buzz Lightyear's big, brash, kind of dumb maleness. And so the premise of Lightyear is that it's the film that Andy from Toy Story in 1995 saw a movie called Lightyear and he was obsessed with it, and that is why he purchased the Buzz Lightyear toy, or it was purchased for him. It was the phenomenon of the time, and so this is that movie. And the other thing I'm going to say is, so if it's the movie within the movie, or whatever you want to call it, and it's a movie about an effectively cis, straight, white, action-y hero, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do we really need this at this point? Yes, I get it. The idea is based on their sort of universe logic that this came out in 1995, but you're making it in the 2020s, So did we need this story? And then all the supporting characters are people of color or women or LGBTQIA+, and it's just like, those stories would have been more interesting to me at this point in time, because I didn't need the Buzz Lightyear story. I know how the Buzz Lightyear story is going to end. He's going to save the day, whatever. And I think if the filmmakers had been willing to put those other characters at the forefront, and they sort of try, I'll give credit, they try, but it's always Buzz at the core, right? I think if they had just been willing to use Buzz Lightyear as the lead-in to the franchise or the story, and then have him fade away or disappear, maybe it's a story about having to retrieve Buzz Lightyear. I don't know. I would have been more warmed to that film than just seeing your average generic kind of almost like 90s action thriller story that we've seen a million times before. And this doesn't do a bad job of telling that type of story, but it's also nothing new, right? It's just new because it's animated. I will say, I did think the action was better than watching something like Jurassic World Dominion, but I also think this movie was about 45 minutes shorter, so maybe that's why I was feeling better towards it. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the plot. The only caveat I will say about the plot is it did feel, I'm not going to say mature, but, I don't know if little kids, they'll get the action, but then there's so much talking that happens that I don't know if it will hold their attention. Little kids. I think if you were probably like 8 to 12, maybe 12 might be, too old for that. I don't know. That might be the sweet spot for this film, but there's just I don't know, the hubris of the character also annoys me. And, whether it's the action figure version of Buzz or, this movie version of Buzz, it's not my favorite character. And so to have them have their own entire feature film and have characters who I started to think were more interesting only play supporting roles was not for me. I know it sounds like I'm being very harsh on this, but I also think that, animation is film and art, and so we should apply the same level of, critical eye that we do to live action films, and Pixar has shown before that they can compete in those categories, but this, to me, was kind of phoning it in, I felt like. Now, again, all that being said, you're not going to have a bad time at this film. It's still a well crafted film from a technical standpoint. I think the performances are fine. I just wanted so much more out of it. And because it comes from a studio who's shown time and time again that they can deliver more, it's kind of a bummer. But overall, I'll still give it a 3.8 out of 5. And then the next film I have is called Spiderhead, and it's a Netflix film. It is from Joseph Kosinski, who just directed Top Gun Maverick, which is a film that I admitted that I enjoyed, and I think a lot of people enjoyed based on the box office. It stars Chris Hemsworth, Miles Teller, and Journey Smollett-Bell, and I kind of may or may not have started drifting off because I started watching this late at night, and I thought I may have imagined the end of the film, or that whatever it was, and I had to rewatch it the next morning, and I did not imagine it. It was bad. I'm sorry. It's bad. There's no other way to say it. So the premise is that Chris Hemsworth plays a super genius scientist who runs a sort of lab penitentiary. So they take inmates. The inmates get to live in these really nice circumstances, but they also agree to be the lab rats. And this is not to say that that super geniuses cannot also be super attractive and, good looking and all that stuff and really fit. That's not to say they're mutually exclusive. I just have a hard time believing Chris Hemsworth playing this role. They're also trying to do this thing where he's, super smooth and charming, and he really just wants to be one of the guys and be friends with the inmates. And I thought I was imagining that aspect of his performance. That's what I had to go back and rewatch, and it was just what are the choices here? I don't get what the logic behind this is here. He's, I guess, trying to do his whole master manipulator thing, and it's, oh my God, I struggled so hard. And then Miles Teller and Journey Smollett play two of the inmates who are, have volunteered for this program. They did sort of horrible things, but there are people who probably did worse things. And it's that fine line of you have to find a crime for them that is bad enough that you understand why they're in jail, but not so bad that you hate them as characters. And what they chose, I'm not going to spoil it, but what they chose, I was like, I don't know how I feel. I do know how I feel about it. I felt it was boring or pedestrian. So, it's all about these trials, and then it gets just super bogged down in absolute gibberish pseudoscience. And these trials are, medicines that can control you or make you feel certain things, and they're developing them. And I just, the character choices, the dialogue, the music was always super, I think it was intentional and maybe meant to be ironic, but it always aggressively contrasted what was happening. You'd have very peppy music going against these horrific scenes. I also was shocked. I think it is based on a story that happened at the New Yorker, and I was like, yeah, I could see how this was a good short science fiction moment, but in stretched out into feature form, it sure did not work. And just, the performances across the board from people who I know can be good actors. Not just Chris Hemsworth. He's not the only one at fault here. Miles Teller's performance. Bad. It was bad. I almost had fun. Almost. It was so, it's one of those, is this going to become a weird cult classic? I don't think so, though, because it was just too painful to watch. And it's just one of those moments where we've talked about this before, but these Netflix originals, it used to mean I'm so excited for this. And now more and more, it's just becoming oh no, what do I have to watch this week? And also, what a little asterisk on Joseph Kosinski's summer. If this had come out before, actually, I think people would have been worried about Top Gun Maverick. Maybe not, because it was mostly about Tom Cruise, right? But to go from having, one of the biggest films of the summer into having this be your next release, not so great. Spiderhead, I could not get behind. I'm going to give it a 2.2 out of 5. And then next up, I actually have a trio of Sundance films for you that are now coming out. The first one is called Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, and it stars Emma Thompson and Daryl McCormack and, a couple other people, but it's mostly about them. And this feels like a quarantine film in the sense that it takes place in a very self-contained setting. It's not about the quarantine or anything like that, but I can just, I'm putting on my watch too many movies hat, and it's just all right, you were how can we safely make a movie? Not that you could, but, how can we make a movie that it has circumstances that work and are feasible to achieve within a quarantine? So Emma Thompson plays an older woman or a person of, she's not old, but she plays an Emma Thompson aged character who is a retired teacher. And tiny spoiler, but her husband passes. And so she decides to hire a sex worker because she has never experienced an orgasm. And so the sex worker is played by Daryl McCormack. And, this is a very actor film, which is not a bad thing because when said actor is Emma Thompson, you're going to get a great performance. And so I very much, not being her age, but still being just a human with emotions and feelings, very much identified with some of her nervousness, some of her, I think there's a lot of stigma about talking about these things being sex, I guess, and especially sex as a woman. But, this movie is Emma Thompson's movie for sure. That is why you are going to watch this movie. I think she gives a great performance in it. Daryl McCormack, very charming for sure, but this is Emma Thompson's show. I think the relationship between them feels very liberating. You go on a journey, and I will say it actually is impressive that given the sort of logistical constraints they seem to have put upon themselves possibly, and maybe the quarantine put on them, that they achieve like a really great sense of storytelling within such a confined space. So if you are a fan of Emma Thompson, I say watch this film. I enjoyed it. Even if you aren't a fan of Emma Thompson, probably watch this film and enjoy it. And there's probably something you could learn from it, honestly, when it comes to relationships. So I'm going to give it a 3.9 out of 5. And then the next film I have is called Cha-Cha Real Smooth. Also was a film that premiered at Sundance, and it is written by, directed by, and stars Cooper Raiff. And I remember seeing his debut feature, and it's a word that I guess I'm not on radio anymore, so I can say it, but I try not to swear in the reviews. But his first film was a film called Shithouse, and it was about a college student, struggling to fit in and finding a connection with someone. And Cha-Cha Real Smooth is about a college graduate, moving back home after graduating, struggling to find purpose in life, and then connecting with someone. So he clearly has a formula. And I think he's actually pretty good at the formula. So the person he connects to in this scenario is Dakota Johnson's character. She plays a young mom of a daughter with autism. So that, that comes into play. Cooper Raiff has a younger brother. And the whole film, it takes place at a bunch of bar and bat mitzvahs. And so he, constantly taking his brother these things. And then he keeps running into Dakota Johnson. His mother is played by Leslie Mann. His stepfather is played by Brad Garrett. And again, I think it's a well-done film. It's pretty predictable. It's still sort of warm fuzzy. I was thinking to myself, I was like, if I was 10 years younger, I probably would have had a massive crush on Cooper Raiff just because he's getting very good at playing this sort of innocuous and safe-seeming, ambling through life jovial character. And there are moments where he sort of tries to push himself a bit and I think, be more serious or dramatic, or there's like crying moments or whatever, but they make sense, but they also always make sense within the spectrum of the same character that he has now played twice. And so I am like, oh, it'd be cool to see if you can succeed working outside of your safety zone, because you're clearly good at the safety zone with this and the character from the other film. They felt exactly the same. They felt like probably what I would assume is an extension of him. But I think it's a question of, can you expand beyond this? Can you direct not just yourself if you want to be a director? I actually don't know if he wants to be a director only or a writer only or whatever it is. I think he's done a good job of showing that he can explore the current version of himself, this young 20s guy, et cetera, et cetera. But what will set him apart is, can he take his directing, acting, writing, whatever abilities and apply them to something that doesn't sit so squarely within his existing real life persona? But I am interested to find out. I think that is a compliment to him as a filmmaker, et cetera. Cha-Cha Real Smooth is streaming on Apple TV Plus, and I think, you're not going to have a bad time. He's a personable character for sure. He's charismatic to watch. Dakota Johnson is fine in it. I struggle. She plays the same character over and over and over, and this is no different. And it's the same criticism I have for both of them, right? Where he only has 2 films under his belt. He has played the same character. When she's doing she has a range and sort of a template and a formula, and she sticks to it. And I have yet to see her expand outside of it. And I am getting kind of tired of seeing it with her. And so, I worry that it's a pattern for both of them. I actually do want to give a brief shout out to Leslie Mann, who I think gave a better performance than she stepped outside her usual comfort zone and has some nice moments in this. But overall, it's a watchable movie. If you're past 22, you will relate to the young, dumb moments in it. And so I'm going to give it 3.7 out of 5. And then my last film this week is a slightly more surreal one. And I say that while including it in a week where, there's like a testing, futuristic, whatever, prison island. So that should tell you something. It's called Brian and Charles, and it follows Brian, who is an inventor living in kind of rural Wales, and he builds a robot called Charles. And Charles, this is light science fiction. Charles is definitely functional. Charles has feelings and emotions, it seems like, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. This, I think it technically qualifies as a feature. It's very short. It's an hour and 19 minutes, which means, why not watch it, I guess? But there's definitely a fear with a movie like this that, you could be making fun of the protagonists, Brian in particular. And, that's a fear with something like Cha-Cha Real Smooth, where you have an autistic character. And thankfully, they clearly had input from stakeholders. The actress herself is autistic, etc. Brian and Charles, it's like, oh, are we going to be punching downwards? Like, what are we doing here? And there are scenarios that acknowledge the otherness of his, but I think ultimately it's still, there's a love for these characters, and that is what makes it watchable in the end. It's nothing overly complex. It does get very odd and can be trying. If you were someone who was deeply uncomfortable with something like the first season of The Office, the UK Office, you might be deeply uncomfortable with this film. If you were someone who was able to calibrate based on that, I would say give Brian and Charles a try. Ultimately, it's still sweet. And I think sweetness is something that we could use more of. Cha-Cha Real Smooth also had an element of sweetness, and not saccharine sweet. Just there's a wholesomeness to them at the end of the day that is very hard to pull off. So I'm going to give Brian and Charles 3.6 out of 5.